thank you everybody who has joined this webinar to learn the basic ways to rescue, loon, and transport. We just know now how many people truly love the loons in our area. And we also thank Sheila for spearheading this with Minnesota Lakes Rivers, and for Sammy for working countless hours on combining these slides that we had for this presentation. Thank you. And next. We are Loon Rescue Incorporated. We have been rescuing hundreds of loons since 2013. We started to specialize in rescuing loons in 2015 that were frozen on ice. About 2 years ago, prompted by a good friend of ours, she knew that we've been spending a lot of money on our own personal account to rescue these loons. We go an average of 12,000 miles a year. We don't just rescue loons in the state of Wisconsin. We also rescue eagles, swans, and pelicans and other birds. But, you know, loons, we go everywhere. And she prompted us, and we started a nonprofit. So within 2 years ago, we went Loon Rescue Incorporated. Our phone numbers, we answer that phone 24/7 when people are calling regarding a loon in trouble or advice on how to capture a loon. So if you guys ever come across, you don't know what to do, or you need extra help, don't hesitate to call us. We normally answer the phone right away, unless you go to voicemail and we're also rescuing, so we can't get that phone at that moment.
But like Linda said, we've coordinated rescues. The Bellagio loon, we've helped on that. We've helped in Canada on a couple of rescues out on the East Coast. So we're available for consultation also, for helping out whatever we can.
So keep our numbers ready, you know, if you need extra help, because we are there to help coach also. Next. We're involved in a group of people that nationwide in Canada that learn and, what do you not learn? That coordinate rescues, and they were also involved in some of these slides that we are going to be presenting. So these are the people that we work with, and we all collaborate together to help rescue loons. Next. We meet once a month with the Loon Rescue and Rehab Working Group. What we do is we gather, compile, and share information on loon biology, rescues, heart rescues, giving advice on how we should rescue better, and rehab. And lots of times, some of these people get calls for loons in our area, vice versa. So we're always available to actually help get the right person involved in a rescue.
Pretty much we have a network of North American loon rescuers. Not as many as we would like to see, but that's what we're here for tonight.
And maybe it'll change, we hope. Next. Avian bird flu, I'm sure people have heard about it. It has been prevalent for years. Actually, it's been kind of ongoing for the past 3 years. Actually, learning in our rescue group, there are some positive cases of loons out east, and this is the first this has happened. So we're suggesting to use extra precaution when you are rescuing loons now due to this outbreak. It's best to always now wear gloves, a face mask. Don't maybe use your everyday shoes. Have some kind of boots that you can clean. We always strongly suggest to always have face protection for various reasons, not just from avian flu, but just to protect your eyes from the loons, since their bill is so sharp and they can move that bill pretty quick. We also suggest using rescue disinfectant. We disinfect all our rescue gear, our nets, our boxes, our transport boxes before we ever use it with another loon. You can also use bleach and water, but then you have to make darn sure that none of that bleach smell is there anymore, and you have to rinse continuously. Another thing is to wash your hands and arms good after a rescue. Next. A lot of people we get a lot of calls, and one of the first calls that we get is the people think their loon's legs are broken. The loon does a lot of quirky things with their legs, and their legs also are back on their body than a normal duck. That's why they're wonderful divers, but they're not great at walking. But there has been some suggestion that some of the loons have their legs out of the water as a cooling factor. So there's a lot of ways these loons will be holding their legs, and people automatically think because this loon is in this leg is in this position that they're broken. Like the top picture, this loon liked to rest its legs with both legs out of the water like that for a good hour or so. Other loons, it's just one leg.
But if you notice the colors on the legs too.
Another thing is they're banded birds that we have in our study group. So a lot of people will see these legs out of the water with these colored bands and assume they got a lure or a bobber on them. But every one of these pictures is a normal way a loon will hold their legs, and they are not broken. Next. Banded loons. Every year, we have a researcher, Walter Piper, who is with the Loon Project in Wisconsin. He's been banding loons in Wisconsin since 1993. There was also a DNR, Mike Meyer, who also banded loons for studies in Wisconsin. So we have thousands of loons in Wisconsin that are banded. Walter has just started a couple of years ago banding birds in Minnesota. Well, Kevin Keena also had banded some birds. So you already have banded birds, but you're going to be getting a lot more banded birds. And what's going to happen is a lot of these banded birds, people see these colors on them and automatically think they're bobbers or lures, and they're not.
Well, we've actually had DNR personnel call us and tell us that there was birds wrapped up that turned out to be banded birds.
And if you look at some of these banded bird pictures, some are like red and white, a typical bobber color. But mind you, we've already rescued loons that are banded that also have bobbers on them. Next. All these are normal behaviors of a loon. The top left is another call we get a lot of a preening loon. A loon has an oil gland on the back by their tail, and to disperse the oil to waterproof their feathers, they are turning around and getting this oil dispersed. And a lot of them they'll do a roll preen, as we call it, and they expose their breast, and they're like biting and trying to get all the feathers in line and rubbing that oil on them. And a lot of people think they're picking at themselves and they got something on them because they've been doing it for such a long time. A lot of loons can preen a good preen for a good half an hour. The picture on the right is a typical the foot waggle where the loon's got its leg up in the air. And if you look at that picture, it honestly looks like that loon's leg is broken, but it's not. The bottom left picture is an adult with their chick, and she's basically resting with her leg up in the air, just chilling. But she's also a banded bird. So that person sees those bands, they see the leg up in the air, and they think there's something wrong with it. There's not. And the last picture is a loon sleeping. A loon usually only sleeps about 15 minutes at a time. And normally they only sleep with half their brain. So their other half the brain, they're kind of aware what's going on. So if a loon is sleeping in that position for hours and hours all by itself, normally in shallow area, that's kind of a red flag. There might be something wrong with it.
It's usually lead poisoning at that point.
Next. Okay, a lot of the questions we ask is when people think they see a loon in trouble, we ask them, why do you think the loon's in trouble? We ask them also, how long were you observing the loon? We ask them if it dives, and if it does dive, does it come up right away or does it dive long distances? And we also ask how close you can get to the loon and if you're prepared to capture through our advice if possible. Next. Okay, here's some pictures of loons that are quite obvious they need to be rescued and some don't. Like the one on the left, the loon's got a big ball of fishing line under its chin, plus it's got a lot of line around its head. That one definitely needs to be rescued. The one thing we do tell people, if there is a loon that is rescued and there's line going down its throat, do not cut the line. Or if you're going to cut the line to make it loose enough so the loon is so constricted, you leave at least a good 2 to 3 feet of line coming from that bill. That aids the rehabber to possibly get the line and the hook out. And some people even suggest tying a washer at the end of the line. That way it's heavy and it will not force that line to go down the throat once cut. The middle picture, of course, is the parent that's with its chick, just chilling with its band showing. There is no problem with this loon. It does not need to be rescued. The last picture is a chick that was beached on land. That chick was injured. That chick definitely needed to be rescued.
If you see a loon on land and it's not nesting, it's in trouble. It's either being harassed by another loon, it has lead poisoning. What'd you hit me for?
Or it's injured or sick.
Okay, I'll be quiet.
Next. Okay, here are the 3 common calls we get of loons that people think they're in trouble, and every one of these loons are fine. One is the foot waggle, again, with the leg up in the air, and they think the foot's broken. The second one is a loon is vigorously baiting, where they're doing some really thrashing around in the water. Somersaults, doing their wings. It looks like they want to try to take off and they can't, but they're not. That's a baiting. Now, baiting and entanglement are almost the same, and we're going to try to touch base with that on the next slide. So a baiting loon is fine, but an entangled loon is not, and they're very similar in their behaviors. The last one also is the banded loon, because a lot of people, once they see that band, and if you see in this picture, you can see that little bit of red. It's got a red band on it. I think it was a red it was a red band that was exposed. When a loon swims, sometimes you'll see that red band on the leg or whatever color it is popping in and out of the water, and people see that, and right away it's got a lure on it, it's got a bobber on it, they call us. And lots of times when they call us, they say, it's all full of fishing line too. And then we ask them, well, where's the fishing line? Well, I know there's fishing line on it, it's got a bobber on it. And it's not, it's a band. Next. Bathing versus entangled loon. The behaviors are very similar. They have vigorous actions of splashing, rolling around, actually going on the side, beating one wing, doing somersaults, putting their legs up. You can actually see in that picture that banded loon was showing all his bands because he was doing somersaults. They also will run across the water and beat on their, and kind of flap their wings a little bit, like they look like they should be taking off, and people think, oh, they can't take off, there's something on them. Well, that is a bathing loon. Normally within 45 minutes, that behavior ends. Majority of the time we see that bathing loon is when a loon is nesting more, because they're sitting on a nest and possibly bugs are getting up in them, and then when they get off the nest, when they switch partners. And lots of times during migratory, when they come back, I see more bathing loons, but they can do that any time of the year. An entangled loon, if this loon is still doing this after an hour's time, that's when you're going to have to go up and try to get a closer look to see if this loon truly has line wrapped around it. And that's when you're going to need to approach it with a boat to determine whether it is entangled or not.
And you are allowed to approach a loon, especially if you have a concern. You can get right up 5-10 feet from them and see how they react.
Next. Nesting versus beached loon. A lot of loons that are beached are injured, sick, or have lead poisoning. These loons normally will beach themselves on a level surface, such as a sandy beach, a level grassy area, and a lot of them sometimes even will go up on a boat launch. A nesting loon normally nests between mid-May to mid-July, and typically nest in a more quiet, protected area. So normally when you see a loon sitting on a nest, it's not like right by somebody's house, or it's not by the boat launch. So that's normally how you can tell there's something going on between a beach loon versus a nesting loon, because a loon also nests at the water's edge because they do not walk good. Next. Okay, loon in distress positions. Each one of these loons are in a distress position, but only 2 of the 3 need to be rescued. The first one is a red flag when a loon is looking underwater, lethargically going back and forth, swimming real close to the shoreline, peering underwater, as we call it. And if you approach it, it's not alarmed by your presence, because most loons will not do that. They're long gone. This loon, if it's pacing back and forth, swimming back and forth along the shoreline, under the pier, under a swim raft or a boat lift, there's a big red flag that there's probably something wrong with this loon, and most likely it is lead poison. The second picture of a loon is a nesting loon. That is when you get too close to a nesting loon. A loon will crouch down like that. That's what we call a hangover position. When a loon is like that, he's doing that because he wants you not to see him. That means back away. So if you do see a loon like that, back away and let him be or her be, because that's what they're doing. They're nesting. The third position is the bill is opened, which could be a respiratory issue, such as when they have lead poison, they're having a hard time breathing, and they're breathing with their mouth opened all the time. The only exception is a loon, sometimes when they're nesting, they are it's a hot summer day and they are panting on the nest. That's okay. That's something they do to try to cool off while they're nesting on a hot day. As you see in this picture, this loon's mouth is propped open because it's hooked on the bottom of its bill, which is also another hook in its chest. When a lot of loons are entangled, and lots of times they're entangled around their mouth or their bill, their mouth is kept open due to the fishing line.
And if their mouth's open, they can't really dive because they'll drown, and they can't feed themselves very well at that all.
Next. Okay, this is why when somebody thinks there's something wrong with a loon, we ask them to watch the loon a good hour or 2 just to make sure they definitely see what they're seeing, unless it's quite obvious the loon's got line all around it. Once you're done, using binoculars and a long zoom lens helps to determine whether you need to get a closer look. If you still are convinced there's something wrong with the loon, this is one thing that we do ask you to do. We first ask you if you're looking from shore or from a boat, because we don't know how close you are. If you're on shore, we're going to need you to get in some kind of boat to approach that loon and get a picture and video, because that will tell us whether this loon really needs to be rescued or not. I know a lot of people say, well, I can't get 200 feet from a loon. Right. Most of the time you should give them their space. But when you have a concern, we do ask you to get as close to that loon as possible with the boat to determine whether this loon needs to be rescued. Because if it does need to be rescued, we can't rescue it from 200 feet away. We have to be a good 5-10 feet away. So what we do is we ask you to approach the loon and try to video it and take pictures. And as you're approaching the loon, if the loon dives, we ask you, how far were you when the loon dove? If the loon does dive, then we ask you if it was a short, shallow dive, which means the loon dove, but it didn't stay down long and popped up in the same area, or it dove and it surfaced real far away. Then that lets us determine what kind of way we're going to have to rescue this loon, if it indeed needs rescue once we see the pictures and video. The reason we ask for pictures and videos, we have gone many times without them, many hour drive to come up to a loon that never needed to be rescued. Though last year we did get a call, it was a frantic call. It was a call that was not too far from our home. The guy goes, it's in my driveway, hurry up, something's happening to it. So we didn't ask for pictures.
Wait. I said to get pictures and you said, no, let's go.
No, let's go. We're not that far. So we did. We got in the car, drove to the person's house, and click, next. And here's what we rescued, or didn't need to rescue, was a birdhouse loon.
We drove past it, and the people were standing down farther. And we said, "Where's the loon?" He said, "You drove right by it." They were adamant that was a live loon. But now, if you look at the gentleman's left hand, there's a PVR in there too. So it might add something to do.
So that's why we asked for pictures to confirm that we need, definitely need rescue. The one problem we do have sometimes is some people see a loon in trouble, and then all of a sudden they decide to call us after they're off the lake, they're at home, or they're actually home from their cottage. Well, that's where we have a problem. We don't have any verification this loon's in trouble. So what we do is we ask the people if they can't go back, do they have people, neighbors that could go check that live on that lake? Or we also call the Lake Association and ask if they have anybody that could take their boat out and check to find this loon that's either that looks sick or is entangled. And a lot of people will go above and beyond to go find this loon that might need help. And then we are verified whether we need to come or not. Next.
Some of the gear that we use is we have a big landing net. We do have spotlights. We do a lot of night rescues. Then we have the big Rubbermaid tote, which is actually about a 30-gallon tote. And you'll notice we drill a lot of holes in it for ventilation. And then in the bottom of the tote is crushed newspaper, 3, 4, 5 inches deep. And then we put a towel over it. And then there's also a lid that goes on that clamps on. But if you notice the two kids from Reggie there, they both are wearing goggles. Can't emphasize enough to have glasses on. Even if it's a pair of sunglasses, always wear glasses when handling the loon.
And that's why, too, you want to have binoculars with you, because there are many instances that people do not stay next to a loon that needs to be rescued. They call, we got the pictures, we got the verification, the loon needs a rescue, but when we get to the lake, we can't find the loon.
Or there's 3 or 4 pairs of loons on the lake, so then we have to hunt.
So it's always great to have binoculars. If you cannot find the loon in the center of the lake, then we suggest starting to go along the shoreline, because a lot of injured, sick loons, they may not go beach themselves, but they may hide under a pier, under a boat lift, under a swim raft, or they'll tuck themselves along the shoreline, along the log or the branches. And to find the loon that way, we go real slow around the lake. And if we don't find that loon, the first pass all the way around the lake, we actually go counterclockwise, because sometimes you'll get the view of the loon underneath that pier that's so low to the water where you wouldn't have seen it on the first pass. So sometimes when you can't have somebody, the best case scenario is when that caller sees the loon, stays with the loon until you get there. That's the best case scenario, but lots of times that doesn't happen. Lots of times we spend hours to even trying to find the loon. Next.
This is the net that we use. It has an octagon handle that telescopes from 6 to 12 feet and 9 feet, and it'll go in the middle. It's a 9877 T12, which means 12-foot handle and 72-inch basket. It's made by Ranger Net. It's a veteran-owned company. We get no sponsorship or anything from them, but I'll tell you what, the net works awesome. It's all aluminum. It's very lightweight. It's a real lightweight nylon basket that's 6 foot deep. So once the loon's in it, if you twist it, the loon really can't get out of the net. But with that being said, any large muskie or salmon net can also be used.
But you kind of want to stay away from the rubber net if it's possible, because that is so much heavier. And once you get that loon in the nest, you have to twist that net up as quick as possible, because a loon will do a U-turn as quick as he gets into that net. He's going to turn around. You see how fast they go underwater. That's why we like the really deep net. At least get a net that's 4 feet deep. I mean, we use a really deep net. It works good for us. Some people might not want it as long, but at least get a 4-foot deep net. And like I said, that telescopic handle really works great. Normally we use it at the 6 foot when we're going after loons in the lake, but a beached loon or a loon that I use for ice rescue, I'll normally have it at the 12 foot. out. And but 9 foot also works good for that. You need that extra reach in the water too. It just all depends on the situation.
And we've also used cast nets like you see in Florida when they cast for bait fish. But that takes a little bit of a technique and a learning curve to use it. But that also works very well.
Next.
This is our hook detangling kit. The main tools that we really use is a pocket knife and the side cutters there, the large nippers. Because what happens if the loon is hooked up, first of all, we try to take the knife and cut the line loose as long as it's not going down its throat. And once we verify that, we try to get the line loose around the body so it doesn't do any more damage and cut into any more of the loon's tendons or anything like that. Then once we get to the hook, and this is always usually done with two people, one doing the basic surgery, I guess you could call it, and the other one stabilizing the loon by holding it, is say if the hook's in the body and you feel comfortable and you know you can pass that hook up back out without doing any damage, poke the barb of the hook out, cut it with the side cutters, and then back the lure back out. And we've had anything from a small jig up to a 8-10 inch musky lure with multiple hooks. And this is the techniques we've used for it.
Next. Beach loon. This is a loon that probably anybody can rescue if you know the right way to approach it. These are ones that usually don't dive, but sometimes when you approach them, they will flush back into the water. So the one way you should never approach a loon that's beached at the water's edge like this, do not walk from the land directly to the loon by the water, because it'll see you coming and it'll probably flush in the water unless it's that sick. The technique that we use to get a beached loon is Kevin and me both have a net along, the long handled nets we use. And we both approach, one approaches away from the right side of the loon, the other one approaches away from the left side of the loon, and we walk to the water's edge. If the water is shallow, we will walk in the water. If it's too mucky or too deep, of course, we cannot do that. And then we both start walking along the edge of the shoreline towards the loon. So one's on one side of the loon, one's on the other. So we have a better possibility of getting that loon before it flushes into the water.
And there are escape routes to the water. You may know that. And these are very highly intelligent animals. Loons are super intelligent and they're very aware of their surroundings.
Once in a while, a loon is so lethargic, you could probably walk up to it, but you will always want to make it the chance that possibly this loon is going to flush. So you want to go that way. Let's say the loon is beached and there's a lot of brush in the way, and the lake is either, it's like 3 feet of muck or it's
4 feet of water.
Or 4 feet of water. You're not going to be able to walk in the land, you're on land or in the water. So then it's preferably to take a boat to get this loon. And normally one person drives the boat and the other person, that's when we extend our net all the way to 12 feet. I'm out in the bow of the boat. I do not have the net in the water as we're approaching the loon because I don't know what the loon's going to do. Sometimes we can go all the way up to it and it does not move, and I can net it right that way by putting the net in front of its head. Sometimes before we get there, it's still, it goes into the water, but it's right along the surface of the water and I can see it and I can net it that way while it's underwater as it's leaving that shoreline.
But you always want to try to catch a loon head first. You don't want to go after the tail and scoop it, because if you go head first, they'll dive into the net and then you have them.
I'm trying to, there's something else I want about this beach thing. Oh, if the loon flushes in the water before you're able to get it, a beach loon normally will re-beach itself. So watch the loon and see where it goes. It might take a while, but majority of the time, that beach loon will re-beach itself if you don't get it the first try. There are times too, you might be more advantageous if at a couple attempts it keeps flushing. You might want to wait till it gets dark out and then take a spotlight and walk up on it and direct the spotlight in its eyes and blind it like we do for night capture. And sometimes you're able to walk up to the loon that way.
The reason loons usually beach themselves is to thermal regulate their body. Because if they're either beat up or lead poisoning, and it's usually lead poisoning, they cannot regulate the body temperature. So they're cold in the water. They're not preening, so their feathers aren't really waterproof. So they go up on shore to warm up.
These are two pictures of beach loons that were rescued. If you look on the picture on the left, the loon is real close to the pier, but there's also an escape. You can see that the gap where there was a possibility if we walked up to it, it would rush and go into the water. So normally with this kind of technique, Kevin went with one side with the net, and he had that net ready to go by that hole if that loon chose to evade the capture, and I came from the other side. The problem was this loon was so sick, it didn't even move. It had lead poison, and it didn't even try to get away. The next picture, actually, that's Sheila's husband there. It was a loon that was beached on a lake in Minnesota, and you can see it's right at the water's edge in the grass, a very level area. And I believe one of them at least walked in the water, and that's how they netted that loon so it would not flush into the water.
And if you see a common theme here, we're always saying about lead poison. If you want to save a loon, go through your tackle box, get rid of all your lead weights, sinkers, jigs. Go non-lead. That's the easiest way to save a loon.
Next. Okay, daytime capture. It's pretty easy to catch a loon that does not dive. It's either a loon that is very sick with lead poison and is lethargic, or it's a loon that is so wrapped up in line that it's too weak and it can't dive to evade capture. If it's on land far away, you possibly can take a towel and put it over a loon's head and capture, but our preferred way is a net. The towel works, but then you have to get right down and be right next to them before you catch it, where a net you have more reach. Again, when you're doing a daytime capture, when you pull up to the loon, and if that loon's lethargic or it can't dive, you still want to try to take that net and swoop it in front of the head of the loon. So sometimes you kind of wake a loon up when that net's coming at them, and their defense is, oh, we got to dive. So when it dives, it's going to dive into the net, and it's not going to dive away from the net. If you try to scoop a loon up from behind the loon, there's a possibility you're going to miss them, because that loon's going to dive away from the net.
And you usually get one golden opportunity. They don't know what you're doing. So if you miss the first time, now you educated the bird, and it gets a little harder each time.
Because he knows what you're doing. And his thing is to get away from you. He doesn't know you're there to help him. And when you do net a loon, you try to twist that net up as quick as you can and try to pull up as quick as you can. Because like I said, that loon still, even if it's sick, even if it's entangled, it's still going to try to get away and do that what do you call it, U-turn the net, or it's going to try to jump out of the net if it's too shallow. Next.
Loons landing on pavement. When it's raining out and storming and a loon's had enough and it sees a wet road, it sees a wet parking lot, it thinks it's water, and they will sometimes land on it. Sometimes they're forced down because of storms. And one time we even had one land in a cow pasture, or not even a cow pasture, cow pen full of manure, thinking it was a lake. That one made national news, by the way.
But basically, another thing, it's called a loon fallout. It's been happening more often. Loons are migrating thousands of feet up in the atmosphere, and they run into a storm. A loon is a very heavy-bodied, solid-bone bird. So any extra weight on that bird causes it to crash down. If it gets iced over, like a plane gets de-iced, well, loons don't get de-iced. They actually will get iced over while they're flying high in the atmosphere, and they come down on Earth like a missile. Majority of them don't get that hurt, but some do. Normally, if you are rescuing a loon on the ground, it's preferred that you go take it to a rehab for a exam, because they could have injured themselves landing on hard surface. But if a loon is still somewhat healthy, when you approach a loon on land when there's no water around, even though a loon does not walk, they can wing row and scoot so fast that you're going to be running after them to catch them.
And do not ever put a loon in a small pond. They need about 1,000 feet of clear space to take off. And we've had people trying to do good and put them in a small pond, and we have to turn around and rescue them and get them out of the pond to get them into a deeper water.
Because a loon needs like a 1/4 mile runway. It may not need a solid runway of water. We've had loons get out of small ponds if they go into a headwind and there's no trees obstructing their path to gain altitude. So sometimes they're in a 300 by 300 foot pond, but if there's no trees around that pond and there's a strong headwind, they are able to gain the altitude they need to leave. But a pond that's 300 by 300 with tall trees around, they don't get out. And those are the ones we have to go rescue. Next.
All right, you can see the lead sinkers and a jig and all that. And this is what happens to loons is, say somebody's fishing with a small lead jig, you catch a bluegill perch and you start reeling it in. Well, the loon sees that, grabs it, breaks the line, swallows that lead jig. Now they're got lead poisoning. And you can see the rocks in the one picture. They have that in their gullet. And they use that, what?
Gizzard.
Okay, gullet. They use that to grind the fish up and the food up, okay? Well, a loon can't tell the difference between that lead weight or a lead shot from back when it used to be legal to duck hunt with them. So they don't know any better. And that lead is constantly leaching in their body, and that's how they get poisoned.
Another way, a loon might not even be around, but let's say you're fishing with your fishing pole with a worm, a lead sinker, and a hook, and you catch a little panfish, but the panfish swallows the hook and the sinker and the worm. Well, you catch the fish and you know you're not going to be able to pull that hook out, so you cut the line and you throw the fish back in the water. Well, this fish, it might not be as fast now because it's already been traumatized by what you all did to it. Well, here comes this loon around, sees that fish, takes that fish, swallows it whole, digests the loon, but the lead sinker stays. When a healthy loon ingests a lead sinker or jig, it dies a slow, painful death. There's nothing any can do to help it while it's out on that water. It cannot get rid of that lead. That lead, what it does, sometimes it might take longer if the jig is painted because the rock's gotta actually grind the paint off and the lead leaches into its system and into its bloodstream. When a loon gets lead poisoning, it dies a slow, painful death. Its internal organs start shutting down and it has neurological issues. That's how we strongly suggest and to educate everybody to get that lead out of your lead tackle box, because all these loons would still be here today if they ingested a non-lead sinker or jig.
75% of the loons we catch, they test for blood, and they all have lead levels in them. Some minute, some too high, and lead is just the scourge of our planet right now with this. So if we can do one thing, get the lead out.
We do know that we've heard that Minnesota DNR has got the buyback program. So if you have lead jigs, go through your tackle boxes and you can turn them in, I guess, for cash for non-lead fishing tackle. Go through, spread the word. Lead is bad. We got to get lead out of the system until they ban lead in the states. There are bans in the states out east, but Wisconsin, Michigan, and Minnesota do not have any lead ban on any lead tackle sales. And we are losing loons like crazy due to lead poisoning.
Well, we're losing swans and eagles too. So.
Okay, next. Here's a very healthy loon. Was a very healthy male loon. It was a banded loon on one of our study lakes in Wisconsin. He raised chicks. He was healthy. He did the normal thing they do. He went to Lake Michigan, pre-migrating down to the south. Lots of times they'll leave their territorial lakes and go to Lake Michigan and fatten up. This loon made the mistake of eating something with a jig, a lead jig. The guy that saw this loon on Lake Michigan actually went up in his paddleboard and picked this loon out of the water with his hand. That's how lethargic this loon was. And a couple of weeks ago, this was a healthy loon. This loon died. This loon should have not died, but this loon never was given a chance after ingesting that lead sinker. Next. We take all our how high the lead is, if it has lead, and they also do an x-ray, and in the x-ray the lead was visible. They start, it's what it's called a chelation method, which is a very expensive, painful method of trying to draw the lead out of the bloodstream. The loon has to endure a lot of shots and then a time to recoup to see if the chelation is working, and they recheck the lead levels. But everything depends how much lead is in it, how long that lead's been in it, and how much damage it's done, and how much damage it's not reversible, where we cannot save that loon. Next. All right. This is just a handful of loons we have rescued. Every one of them died because they had lead poison. None of these could be saved. The one in the top left, that was a banded loon, and it was over 30 years old. Actually, it was from Michigan. It was banded in Michigan, but it migrated through and was on Lake Mendota in Madison. It was beached, and it survived 30 years of everything else, but the lead is what took it out. When you are rescuing loons, you're going to be defecated on, and like the one on the top right picture.
In other words, they poop on you.
The one on the top right that thing was like 30 feet off the shoreline. It was just sitting in the grass on the people's yard. When we picked it up, it spewed bile. It was so sick, and it was because it ingested lead. The bottom left, that's where we get a lot of loon calls too. If you see, the loon is still in the water kind of, but it's beached real close to the water edge. That also was a loon that had lead poison. The one right next to it, the Perch Lake loon, he looked like he was sleeping, but he wasn't. He was so lethargic and out of it. The people had seen him in their shallow bay for hours and called, and they took a boat out and could easily scoop him up. Those are the big signs of lead poison. They're lethargic. Some loons actually even drowned because they can't hold their head up due to the lead poisoning. That's why, please get the word out. If anything with this webinar, besides rescuing a loon, get rid of that lead tackle. You should see the amount of lead tackle I got them out of my dad's tackle box years ago. A lot of people have it all. Still, get rid of it. And don't just throw it out in the garbage. There's places that you can take lead tackle, to in your area. You'd have to find out.
Common rescues we do is entanglement. And you can see that the chick there has a hook, and it's going around its beak and down, possibly down its throat, and that one I'm not sure.
What?
So at that point, we would not cut the line on that. We would leave that, take it to the rehabber like that. But if it was wrapped around the body some more, so we would try to cut the line and release the tension on it so it's not doing any more damage to the loon. The lures, you can see, when they're through it, sometimes if you can tell it's not going to do any more damage, you can poke the hook back out again, cut the barb off, and then back the lure out. And that's the best thing to do. And if you're not comfortable with that, well, then of course, just put it in a box and get it to a rehabber and let them do it. But all this stuff is so much easier if you have a second set of hands helping hold the loons down, because they will flail around. And if you have to, you can put a towel over their head, but unless the hook is up by the face, which we've had happen quite a bit, then you need that second person. Otherwise, just put it in the transport tote and get it somewhere that's safe.
The one thing is, if they're hooked, sometimes there's a lot of line wrapped around them too, because the loon is struggling and frailing around. You want to make sure once you dehook the loon and get rid of the line, make sure all the line is gone. Check its wings, check its legs, so there's no line that is wrapped tight around, because sometimes they'll wrap real tight around their leg. So just make darn sure before you release that loon that there's no extra line on that loon. Another thing is in fall is when we get the most entanglements on juveniles, because juveniles are left alone once their adults leave them. They're on their own to fend for themselves, and they go for that easy meal of more likely somebody fishing. So if somebody's fishing, we always tell them, if you see any loon around, pull that line up and wait till they leave or go move to another area. If you accidentally hook a loon, don't cut the line and let it go, because sometimes some of these loons we can never catch because some of them are diving and evading capture. But a lot of juveniles we rescue every fall due to being entangled and hooked.
Right. And that fishing line acts just like a knife sometimes, cutting into the body, usually around the legs and stuff. It tightens and constricts. So yeah, it's really important to get the line on.
Next.
Boat strikes. Well, this is one that can be prevented totally, but our lakes are getting so busy and they're so overcrowded at some points that the loons are getting hit. Plain and simple, if loons' parents are there with the chicks, they'll a lot of times stay with those chicks and they'll try to fend that boat off rather than dive away to safety. The chicks don't know how to dive very well, so they get hit. And then, of course, we also have people that intentionally are harassing or chasing loons, trying to hit them. And I don't want to say the groups, but it happens, and it happens a lot. So if you see somebody intentionally swerving at loons or whatever, get videos, get pictures, turn it into your local warden, and let them know what's going on.
Or even say something to them.
Right.
And
Stop it.
to tell them to stop it. But it's sad that so many loons do get hit. Especially, I'll tell you real quick, the one in the bottom left, that was an adult male. He had 2 chicks with him. He had a broken humerus, but we kept him on the lake because we knew if we brought him in, he was going to be euthanized.
Well, first of all, we caught him and determined that his wing was broken and there was nothing we could do. But he had the 2 chicks, like Linda said, and loons' mission in life is to pass their genetics on to the next generation. So,
and basically what happened was he was still feeding himself and he was still diving and feeding his chicks. And we knew if we took him off the lake, another loon would come in and most likely kill those chicks. Both those chicks fledged. So he did his mission, but then shortly after they left, he did pass before we could catch him.
as soon as those chicks fledged from the lake, he literally pulled himself up on shore and died. He lived to make sure they lived.
So there's a strong will in these loons, but he was hit by a boat. Next.
Fireworks. This is another one, and I've lit fireworks off. I'm sure a lot of people have, but Linda, go ahead.
Okay. Basically what happens with a loud explosion, it scares the family and they separate. Last year, we actually had 2 calls of a loon chick, very young, all by itself, not with the parents. It could have also been because it was the 4th of July and it was a heavy traffic of boats too. But it also could have been that the loud explosions from all those fireworks that they were lighting off spooked the whole family and they scattered. Falling embers. I'm sure you've seen it on your lakes where people blow off fireworks and you see all those embers falling into the water. Well, they also land on loons. This loon chick had embers fall on the back of, on its back. And with the hot embers burning his back, this chick turned around to flick the hot embers off its back and burnt his eyes. So that's just showing you what fireworks does. Last year also, we had a loon that was found in between lakes, and the nearest lake was like 10 miles. this loon was probably flying overhead. Somebody lit off a firework, and the percussion and the explosion actually forced the loon to land on the ground, and it had burnt embers in its feathers. So these fireworks are very dangerous, not just to loons, but to a lot of wildlife. Next.
Loons being shot. This is a pet peeve. I'm a longtime hunter all my life, duck hunt, everything. People are intentionally shooting loons. We've had loons that were shot from people standing on piers shooting down in the water. We've had loons shot while they were flying overhead. And you can tell by the position of the pellets in the bodies. You can't mistake a loon for a duck. If you are, you don't belong owning a gun. And this isn't done by hunters. This is done with, whether she's going to be mad at me or not, idiots with a gun. Plain and simple. People, do not shoot loons. And it's not just loons. We've had eagle shot, swan shot. It's got to stop.
And it's like the loon, the adult loon that Kevin's holding in this picture. This loon was beached that Monday right after opening duck hunting. So most likely they shot at it. And actually it was beached, but that one gave Kevin a run, and Kevin almost didn't get it when it was already in the water.
I got it.
You got it though. The other one was a very healthy juvenile chick. Actually, when that was banded by Walter Piper, that was one of the heavier chicks, and it seemed to be a real strong chick. The chick, when it's a juvenile and they start to fly, they normally first fly to area lakes and get to know the area. Well, this loon made the mistake of landing on this lake where it was shot. Both loons had to be euthanized because their wings were broke.
Euthanize is a nice term. They had to be killed. Plain and simple.
Next. Artificial nesting platforms. There are a lot of people are really strongly using them now due to the fact that their water is fluctuating and either the nest gets flooded out or there's no water. Other lakes have absolutely no nesting area because there's no natural vegetation, natural shoreline left area.
And one nice thing about artificial nesting platforms, if they're done right and anchored right, they can float up and down with wave action and different fluctuations in water levels. But
when you are planning on putting an artificial nesting platform out, you have to make sure that it's just reserved for a pair that is struggling to hatch chicks. If this pair is using a nesting platform already, or this pair in this territory is using a natural area, you do not place another artificial nesting platform on that lake. Because
just wait. Just don't tell me to hush. There are territories on lakes. Okay, you might have a 500-acre lake and you might have 3 pairs of loons. And believe it or not, I saw you laughing. They draw an artificial line in the water, and we've seen this on rescues. A loon will come up to that line and call, but they will not cross it. So if you would put nesting platforms like right next to each other, they would beat each other up, and it just would not work. Now, go ahead.
So you want to make sure when you do place one, it's for one pair only, and it's a pair that is no other nesting options for them. Now, the next thing is when you do build a nesting platform or get one, you make sure that you do it the right way, using the right sufficient material, and making sure that it is not done
haphazard, like in the pictures here. Now, the DNR has protocols on how to build them. Loon Watch has directions on how to build them. So it's already out there. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You just have to copy how it's been done. You don't want loose netting, bent poles and stuff broken where the chicks or the adults can get hooked up into it. Go ahead.
And that's one thing too, when you are committed to putting an artificial nesting platform on, regular yearly maintenance has to be done and looked over to make sure there's no loose wires, there's no loose material, everything is snug after the year it's been used, because this is when these loons depend on using this as a safety to nest, but if it's not safe for them and they're injured, it's not worth having it out there for them. We have rescued loons. Like we had one guy, and this was not a approved artificial nesting platform. He had put a whole bunch of sticks with wire because he thought that would help the loons. And then he took some of the sticks out, but he left the wire, and the loon got stuck in the wire. Another one, they were using that snow fencing that you see for
the mesh cover, the green plastic snow fence.
they put that on the nesting platform, and they didn't have it down snug. It was loose. Either when the loon was getting off or on to nest, he stuck his head in the hole of this netting material, and he must have ripped part of it off because he did free himself, but he was swimming around the lake for weeks with this snow fence around his neck because nobody could catch him to help him. He dove. Chicks already have got stuck in the netting and died because they couldn't get out. Another adult almost drowned because it was stuck in the wrong netting, entangled in the netting, and it was rescued, but the eggs were lost. So if you are going to put an artificial nesting platform, make sure you take care of it every year. Normally we suggest once the loons are done nesting to bring that artificial nesting platform in, because they're not going to use it again. They don't go back to the nest. Take it back in, look it over, store it for the next year before you bring it out. Double check to make sure everything's okay and put it out after ice out. Next.
Loon handling. Again, I can't emphasize enough to always wear glasses. I don't care if they're reading glasses, sunglasses, goggles, whatever. Have some type of eye protection. When you're handling a loon, you always want to try to push the wings against the body, not squeeze them too hard, but just to hold the wings from the bird injuring itself. And it's always a good idea to know where that beak is and have a hand on that. That's why it's really beneficial to have two people to do it. But if you can't do it, you can always put the towel over the head. And that'll usually calm the loon down enough to let you do what you have to do.
When you do rescue a loon, sometimes their feet get stuck through the netting, or their one wing gets stuck in the netting. That's why it's always better to have two people, so you can fold the wings in, hold the wing onto the wings, and have the other person make sure that loon is not entangled before you pull it out of the net. If you see with the picture on the top, we're holding the loon, Kevin's holding the loon with one hand in between the bill. If for some reason you're able to, it's hooked by the head, but you know you can unhook it easily, what we suggest doing is, because you can't unhook a loon with a towel over its head, hold the bill very, hold it good, but make sure you have your finger between the bill because it needs to breathe that way.
I never release the bird until if I'm holding it, I say, okay, can I release it or do this? Because that bill is a weapon. It's very strong and it does hurt. And they can draw blood if they hit you hard enough. So it's just something to be aware of and be very careful.
Yeah, they do bite.
Yes, they do bite. Safe loon transport. Go ahead.
Okay, this is our recommended for what to put a loon in once you successfully capture it. We usually use about a 30-gallon tote. We drill very many holes in it because a loon is, they overheat very quickly and they need a lot of circulation of air. So we drill many holes, and then after we drill the holes, we file them down just to make sure there's no sharp edges from the plastic that you put the holes through. What a loon has a keel, which is it's kind of like a ship, and a loon should not be put on a flat surface because they kind of list back and forth. And if a loon is going to rehab, or if it's thin, it can actually rub its keel and give it a keel sore. So we always suggest loons to be always put on some kind of padding. Our suggestion is to crumple tight pieces of newspaper, clean, dry newspaper, at least 3 inches, and place it at the bottom of the transport container. then add a towel over that paper, and then add the loon, and then close the lid. Now, there's two ways to do it. We put a lid on ours because we have plenty of ventilation, but there's other ways you can do it, which will be in the next slide. Another thing too, when you're transporting a loon, never put it in a trunk. Some people have actually put loons in trunks.
And the back of pickup.
And backup pickup trucks. Always have it in the back of your car and keep it in a cool, dry area of your car.
And another alternative for crushed papers, if you don't have that, you could put 2 to 3 towels down and make it a thicker, softer bottom for them. It just can't be on a hard surface, or it'll rub it raw, and then that loon, unfortunately, is going to have to be.
The one thing that you want to do is you want to, that loon, when you put it on that bed of either towels or paper, that it actually sinks in and it's like a cradle for it.
I don't know if I mentioned before, but loons are one of, if not the hardest bird to rehabilitate. They can only stay in captivity about 6 weeks. They're susceptible to like aspergillosis, which is basically a pneumonia, which is incurable. They have a very extreme diet and a lot of different care. A lot of places and facilities don't really do loons because they're so difficult.
So basically, you want to get them in the best way to transport them so that they have the best chance of surviving. Next. Here's basically a step-by-step of the dried housing that we suggest to use. The paper, the towel over the paper, the loon on top of the towel. And if you don't have enough holes, or you don't want to put holes, or you want to give it extra ventilation, you can also drape a light sheet with clips to contain the loon in.
Lots of clips.
Lots of clips, and don't use clothespins because those things get popped off right away by the loon. You need something a little stronger than a clothespin to Another thing, if you rescue a loon at night or just before dark or after hours of your rehab, you're going to have to keep that loon overnight till you can get it to the rehabber in the morning.
Now, you are allowed to keep the loon up to 24 hours for any wild animal to get it to a rehab. But time is of the essence with loons, especially. The sooner you can get it there, the better for the loon.
So when you keep it overnight, we suggest keeping it in a cool, dry area in your house, away from any kind of pets or noise or kids. And
somebody said a padded laundry basket that will not work because of the fact of the grating in there. They will rub their beaks raw with mesh. Just an update I saw.
Oh, okay. So basically, when you do have that loon and you're keeping it overnight, do not put it in water, do not feed it or offer it food. Just let it stay in a nice quiet area and it will calm down, and in the morning take it to the rehabber where it needs to go to. Next. One thing you never, ever, ever do is put a loon with any kind of wire. I'm even talking about those dog crates that are almost all plastic with a little bit of wire
grate on the door.
Grate on the door, because a loon is going to try to get out. And when it tries to get out, it's going to continue to go through the hole of that wire and rub its beak, face, and eyes, and it's going to damage, and it's going to do non-repairable damage to it. So never put a loon in those cages, and never put a loon anywhere on a flat surface. It always needs something to cushion its keel.
You see, when they release loons after rehab, they have to be 100% because they don't have to make doctor visits out in the water. So these birds have to be 100% to be releasable. And if they've got a damaged beak like that or anything, they can't go back in the wild, and then that's a death sentence. And it's so preventable. And people that should know better have done it, like that live trap that was done by an official.
DNR warden.
So, I mean, it happens.
Next. So it's basically repeat at me. Never, ever use wire. That's how important it is to not put a loon in any kind of wire kennel or cage. I mean, if you for some reason don't have a tub, you can put it in a pillowcase. I mean, that's to the point, is leave that wire kennel out of the mix of containing a loon. Next. Now, you possibly want to put it in a cardboard box, but if you see what happens when you put a loon in a cardboard box, especially if it's a very lightweight box, you might be able to get away with putting a loon in a real thick box
Like a refrigerator box or something.
that is clean and that has any kind of chemical odor on it. But any thin box, that loon is going to be working its way out before you get it to the rehabber.
Loons should never be put on hay or straw. There's too much fungus in them that can also get a aspergillosis and get it sick, and then that's not reversible either. So it's best to keep them on crushed newspaper or a couple layers of towels.
And there's one thing I did forget to say, that with the entanglements, I just thought about it. It just kind of popped in my head. If you are able to capture a loon that is easily to catch because it's entangled, and you don't know how long that loon has been entangled, there is a possibility it is too weak and too thin to be placed back in the water, even if it would be an easy way to unhook it. So if a loon is very skinny and you can feel its breastbone, it has to go into a rehabber to jumpstart its digestive system and fatten it up so it's got the energy to get back on the lake to capture its own fish. If it's so weak from being entangled for so many days, even if it's an easy way to untangle it, you're still going to have to take it in, because if you put it back in the water, it is not going to be able to recover by catching fish. It's going to be too weak.
And with that being said, when we catch a loon, we take a note of the environment, the type of year, time of year, because if we know that loon has chicks, or is one of the parents are on a nest incubating eggs, we always try to get it back in the water ASAP. But sometimes it's best just to be on the safe side and get it into a rehabber and get them checked. We've driven a couple hours one way just to make sure, got the okay, and put it right back in the water. It's not cut and dry. You got to use your judgment. But if you know it's been tied up for a week, chances are it should go in.
Actually, well, I'll leave you with this one. This happened 2 years ago. It was one of our study lake loons, and he was entangled. We don't know how many days he was entangled. He didn't seem that skinny, but he was a nesting loon. Once we got him untangled, we realized we couldn't find a hook. So we were worried he had a hook and he possibly could have swallowed the lead sinker. So we drove him an hour and a half to Reggie just to verify with and examine an x-ray that he indeed did not ingest a lead sinker. Thankfully, he did not. We drove him another hour and a half back and released him back in the lake. The next couple of days, we got a phone call. They found a dead loon. And our hearts just went down because we thought, oh my gosh, it was him. It was not him. It was his banded mate. She's the one who swallowed ingested the lead sinker and hook. What must have happened was he must have gotten entangled with her line and got most of the line, but she's the one who ingested the sinker and hook. So it was just kind of a real sad situation.
And totally preventable.
Next. Okay, these are, when you do capture a loon, there's a lot of rehabbers that are not well versed in loon rehab. So you have to make sure when you do have a loon that you take them to a qualified loon rehabber. We have the two here. We always take all our loons in Wisconsin.
We have the best in the state of Wisconsin. Their premier loon rehabber in the nation is Raptor Education Group. They probably have an 80 to 90% success release rate. They're always open for phone calls, for consultations. And then in Minnesota, you have WRC, who's very well versed in loans.
So these are to me, the primary ones to call when you have a loon that you have just captured.
And sometimes you can give them a call with a question and ask them, let them and find out if it really does need help.
Next.
A big thank you. Plain and simple, we couldn't do it without you. you're signed up for this, you definitely care about loons. Every loon we save saves generations. Loons are in trouble. Their numbers are going down. And it's not just because of lead and people, it's also because the eagle population is going up. And development on the shorelines is infringing on them a little bit too. And in climate change and in water clarity, loons are visual feeders. They need clear water. That's why you really never see them on a muddy lake or anything like that. But without people stepping up and helping, calling, observing, it's funny when we go on a rescue, it's my loon. You're here to save my loon. It's not our loon. It's not your loon. It's my loon. They take ownership to these birds. And they're very, very strict on what happens to them. So without you, we couldn't do this.
As we say, it takes a village to rescue a loon, from the person who reports it to the rescuer, and if it needs rehab, to the rehabber, and then to the release. Because every loon that release is getting a second chance at life. And when releasing that loon is not just, you're not saving that loon, you're saving future generations that loon is going to produce over time.
Real quick, tell them about this.
Okay, if we have time, I'll give you the real quick one on, his name was, they named him Lester.
People take ownership to these birds.
A lot of people named the loons, and his name was Lester. He was on a lake about 20 minutes from our house. 2 years ago, he was totally entangled with fishing line. By the time he's the one who it took us 2 hours to find him on this 132-acre lake. We finally found him. We got him into Raptor Education Group. He had so much line around his tongue, around his head, around his wings. He had line going down his throat. So he needed surgery the next day. They did lavage surgery where they place him under, they turn him upside down and they flush his gizzard out, and along came the hook and the lead sinker. He was starting to get lead poison, but he didn't have it that high due to the fact that he was rescued so quick after ingesting it. He still needed to do a week of chelation to make sure all the lead was out of his bloodstream, which he did. A week later, he was released back on his lake with his mate and his, at that time, juvenile chick. He actually stayed with the juvenile chick. I personally went and checked on him. He was doing good. So, we kind of thought, good, everything's good. 11 weeks later, after we released him, we got a call. He was icing in on the lake. He could not fly away.
The lake literally froze over that night, so it was a quarter inch to a half inch of ice at the most.
So again, we went out and rescued him. We captured him.
She went out 700 feet on quarter inch ice and rescued him in a hole, and she's talking to him all the way out there.
Yeah.
Go on.
So anyways, we captured him. We took him back to Raptor Education Group. At that point, he gained weight. They couldn't find no evidence of broken bones in his wings, no fractures. They just thought maybe from all that line that was around him that he had some kind of soft tissue damage and he needed more time to recover. He was taken to Florida to recover because our lakes were frozen. Last year, he flew back on his own.
And this year he's back.
And he's back this year. So for 2 years, 2 rescues, this loon has come back.
So what we do does make a difference.
So we know some of these loons do recover and do come back and thrive.